I've been reading a few novels these past few weeks. I love Tessa Bailey. I love her. I love her writing and I love her like spicy scenes and all that stuff. So then her third book in her sports series came out and I was like, cool. Let's read this. I was so emotionally traumatized by that novel. And then when I finished it, I was so emotional at work. People were like, what's wrong with you? And I'm just like, I can't tell you that I am emotionally depressed because I read a book, because you won't understand.
I'm talking about emotionally scarring people, so I'm writing this dark fantasy right now.
Mm-hmm.
My poor beta readers, they're like, but now I'm invested in these characters. Now I have to know how it ends, and I know you're destroying everything.
I know, it's like the best, worst feeling in the world. Because you want those reactions from your beta readers. You really do. But then you know that you're actually doing the writing well. And that is what counts.
That's true. And when I hear them saying, I know what you're about to do because I saw your outline.
Don't do it.
And now I'm just, wow, you just set us up. I'm drinking my pure mango juice because it tastes so good.
So I actually found a very interesting tea. It's a tea/coffee. So we as South Africans actually like doing these now. So first we started with a red cappuccino, which is a rooibos tea. That is the cappuccino. It's delish. And then you put like honey on it and it's just amazing. And this is a tea chai latte. It's kind of similar to your chai latte type of vibes. I think it's the same thing, but this is just the South African little sachet that I used. So with this caffeine boost, let's get into our episode. Hey ho, let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tea and Tales. I'm Madeleine Einau.
And I'm Sarah Sampson. Thank you to all of our listeners and our viewers for joining us each week. We especially want to thank Pamela Summers and Matt Durante. Thank you so much for commenting and for interacting with us. Today's episode is a super cool one, and it's one that I wish that we'd had like 2 seasons ago, but we didn't. An author reached out to us and said, hey, I've got something that I think you all need to talk about. And when she told us, I was like, absolutely.
Why didn't we think of that?
Right? So today we're talking about hybrid publishing with our special guest, Alexandra Wendt. So please welcome to Tea and Tales, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for being here and talking to us. We are very, very excited to talk to you. Well, not only about hybrid publishing, because that is the episode that we're going to be discussing today, but also a little bit about yourself. I always love learning about authors and their writing and how they came to write the novels that they do write. And especially because you are also a fantasy writer.
Tell us a little bit about your books and about you.
Yeah. So I've been writing pretty much my whole life, I want to say. I wrote my first novel when I was 14. It was high fantasy, kind of based on Regency, Victorian England a little bit, magic, like epic battles, you name it. Worked on that for many, many years. Didn't really take me anywhere though, so I eventually shelved it. And I wrote a few more books kind of throughout college and after college, all fantasy, either set in a completely different world or more like urban fantasy set in our world, but with these kind of magical elements. And then my debut novel of Constellations and Clockwork that came out last November, I wrote that after I finished my master's program. And so that was kind of inspired by what I was studying at the time, Italian Renaissance history and art, but still incorporating these fantasy elements and just tropes I love, or like things I love to see in books, like heists and enemies to lovers romance, found family, and all of that stuff.
Well, can I just say that you had me at enemies to lovers? I was like, I will read that. I don't care what it's about. If it's enemies to lovers, I'm there for it.
Yes, a favorite for sure.
1000%. So is there a little bit of Italian in your novel or not really?
There is, yeah. And I know I've heard from some readers that it can be a little bit frustrating because there isn't always a lot of like context clues for it, which in a way was purposeful. Yeah, you don't need to really understand it to kind of follow along the story. But there is some Italian dialect in it, some Italian words that I throw in, particularly for the clothing terminology I use. I try to stick pretty faithfully to Renaissance clothing of like the late 14th century. And so I tried to use the actual Italian words to describe them, especially where I couldn't find the word or just didn't think the word existed in English, like Jonea, for instance.
Sometimes there's some like phrases and words in Afrikaans, and I'm like, ugh, there's just not an English word that gives that same
Yeah,
vibe as an Afrikaans. And I'm just like, then I have to write like an entire paragraph in English just to explain like one word that I wanted to say in Afrikaans. And
yeah,
I'm like, seriously.
exactly.
I personally love a fantasy book that makes me go and research something and learn something new because, I mean, I write the kind of fantasy, the super high fantasy that I make up most things. And so the words like the root might come from somewhere in the world, but I make
Yeah.
up the word. And so it's fun when I'm able to be like, oh, let me go look up what that means in this language and what she's describing because this is fun. I want to learn it. I want to ask you about how you came to the decision to use hybrid publishing instead of the more well-known traditional or self-publishing.
Self-publishing, I would say, was kind of out for me initially just because the thought stresses me out too much. I legitimately admire the writers who do self-publishing, and maybe I will in the future. I'm not saying no to any avenue, but just the thought, everything that it takes to do all of it yourself seemed just way too stressful for me. And it had kind of initially always been my dream to be traditionally published, and that was the route I tried to go with previous novels by querying literary agents. So that was the initial plan for this book. I finished it in kind of mid 2023, soon after I had my first son, and I thought, well, I'll try querying literary agents. I honestly wasn't very hopeful about it because it does have a particular, I don't want to say niche audience, but it was inspired by like my own, Christian faith. Those elements were certainly present in it. And so I was a little bit worried, is an agent going to like this? Is traditional publishing going to like this? And then I heard about Storyweaver Publishing through some Instagram followers. And when I read their mission statement and what books they were looking for, which is, gritty Christian fiction, I thought, oh my goodness, this is absolutely my book. Like they are 100% looking for this, like something that has these more kind of faith-based elements in it, but also deals with kind of hard and difficult topics. So it wasn't necessarily that I was seeking out hybrid publishing itself, but that I found the right one that worked for me. And then when I researched more about hybrid publishing, I thought, yes, this actually seems like a really good fit. I get a lot of the flexibility of self-publishing, but I don't have to deal with that stress that I was worried about with it.
I love that phrase that you used. It was the right fit for me, because I think sometimes people feel like you have to do something in a very specific and certain way, especially in the literary industry. That is so false. Every agent does things different. Every publisher does things different. You have to find that fit.
Yeah, exactly. I'd say like I was initially very like tunnel visioned with traditional publishing, like, oh, this is the route that, real serious writers take, so it must be the route that I take too. And to kind of realize, no, I don't have to do it this way. That was really freeing to me.
That's really cool. So with hybrid publishing, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's like a mixture between self-publishing and traditional publishing, where you contribute financially to them a little bit. Yes.
So you can. The way mine runs is they do Kickstarter campaigns to fund it. I don't know. I admittedly haven't researched a lot of other hybrid publishers, so I'm not entirely sure how they do it. But I know, when you fund things yourself, you always kind of run that gray line of vanity presses, which is something you do want to avoid. So like my publisher makes it very clear. I think if I'm right, I think they do allow you to fund it yourself at the start at least, but then they always want to, get those funds back through a Kickstarter campaign at some point, either at the front end or the back end of the process. So yeah, so they do Kickstarter basically to fund it all.
Interesting. And then I'm assuming also like with self-publishing, you have more, I say control in quotation marks, but control over like the cover of your novel and what your blurb is going to be like, and do editing and all those things.
Yeah, so with at least with my hybrid publisher, I had a lot of control over things like my cover. I had a lot of say in what I wanted to see in it, certain visuals and stuff. I would say, I mean, not having self-published, but I would say I had a lot of control over different aspects of it. And what they provided a lot of kind of professional guidance and helped me understand parts of the publishing process that I didn't really understand or even know about. And so I found that very useful as well.
So back in 2018, I went to a big convention in New York, and there was one hybrid publisher there, which was the first time I ever heard about hybrid publishing. And I quickly got scared because I was like, is it really a vanity press, or is this really a hybrid publisher? How do people go about telling, when I'm researching this particular person who says they're a publisher, how can I tell the difference between them as a vanity press who's asking for money and a hybrid publisher who may also be asking for money?
Yeah, so what I found really useful when I was kind of researching all of this initially before going with Storyweaver, a writer friend of mine pointed me to the Independent Book Publisher Association's website. They have a whole list of hybrid publisher criteria listed on there. It's basically, it's a list of criteria that every legit hybrid publisher should meet in order to not be considered a vanity press. Now, of course, at the time Storyweaver was brand new. I was the second novel they published. So,
Oh, wow.
Some of it, yeah. So some of the criteria, like, demonstrating good book sales and stuff couldn't apply here because I was like, well, they're brand new. So in that sense, I was taking a bit of a risk, but otherwise I would absolutely point people to that link with the Independent Book Publishers Association, because if you just kind of follow all of that criteria, I think you can be fairly certain if you're looking at a hybrid publisher versus a vanity press.
I love that. And I actually am on the website right now, and we're definitely going to be posting it for our listeners to go see. But some of the must-haves they have is like they have to define a mission and vision for its publishing program, which is what you said you definitely went to go read about because you were like, okay, is this going to be a fit for me? And I think that is a great way to figure out, like, okay, do you actually know what you want in life, people? Like, if you're a publishing company and you don't know what you want in life, then I don't feel like this is for me. And then to vet submissions. Let me just read what vet submissions mean. So that's basically to see like what novels they do publish and what is their like status in the marketing industry and stuff like that, which you had a beautiful way of saying like, they're new, they don't have any. So, I mean, it was a risk for you to take. And then it also is like, committed truth and transparency in business practices, provide a negotiable, easy to understand contract for each book published, publish under its own imprint, and then publish to industry standards, ensure editorial design and production quality. So these are all just a few mentions, but it's simply, if you are considering doing hybrid publishing, I would definitely recommend going to this website and seeing like what the standard is for being a hybrid publishing company. And if you are like Alexandra, then you will be like, okay, they might not have this, but they tick all the other 5 boxes that they need to tick. So we might take a chance on them.
Yeah. I'd say the biggest one I was personally looking for, and that I look for with publishers in general, is that they vet submissions. Because obviously, if you see one that will just kind of accept anything as long as you throw money at them, that's obviously a huge red flag. And so I liked that Storyweaver is very, particular and focused on what they want. And it seemed to me that they vet submissions for sure.
Yeah, which again combines with their vision and their mission, because if they know what they want, then they won't just take anything because it is money in their pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
And another good way to find out is you have to go in and look at the reviews from their customers. And if their customers are like, yeah, they did all these things for me and they helped me sell and I'm actually making money off of this. And it's like, okay, yeah, they're probably legit. The thing that I liked about the hybrid publisher that I met in New York was they were at a rights fair with authors that they had published. And so I could speak to the authors that they were already working with, and they'd have appointments and go off and talk to buyers to buy the books. And I was like, okay, yeah, they're out here actually doing something. They're not just sitting behind a desk being like, ooh, I got this person, now I got that money.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yes.
for you who did hybrid publish, what do you feel are the pros and cons of deciding to do hybrid publishing?
So I think the pros, the biggest pro is one that I mentioned was that I got a lot of flexibility over how the book was published and what went into it, but I still got kind of the backing and the guidance of a publisher without that like stress and uncertainty of doing it all myself. That to me was the biggest pro. They're also just, at least mine again, they're just all so nice and so chill and easy to work with, which I really appreciated, but professional at the same time, which is really nice. I guess a con would be obviously you're not keeping all of the royalties from it. So, if you want that flexibility behind the publication process, but you want to keep, all of the royalties and not sacrifice any, then self-publishing is probably the way to go. But at the same time, with hybrid publishing, you keep a much higher percentage of royalties than if you go traditional publishing. So there's that as well. I kind of hesitate to say this given some things I've heard, but traditional publishing traditionally gives you more exposure as a writer and they help you out a lot with marketing. Whereas hybrid publishers are smaller, they tend to not have quite as many resources. But again, I hesitate to say this because I've kind of heard from other writers that a lot of traditional publishers aren't kind of doing as much with marketing as they used to because writers now have to have social media profiles. We're kind of expected to do most marketing on our own regardless, it seems like. At least that's kind of what I've heard. I don't have the experience, though, to confirm that.
Yeah, we have seen that trend in a lot of our authors we've had on actually saying that they're required to be out in the media, especially if you're a nonfiction writer. Like you have to have a platform and you have to be out on social media. More for your fiction writers, it's less than your nonfiction. Like you don't have to be established with a platform, but they do ask you to do a lot of the legwork. And we've heard it different from which traditional publisher that they've gotten. Some of these bigger houses will still do more marketing than the smaller traditional publishing houses. So you definitely do want to look at those things in the contract. And speaking of contracts, when you were accepted by them, was there a contract of this is what we're going to do, this is what we offer, this is your side of it? How did that work?
Yeah, there was a contract, and again, another like good sign that I think was also mentioned on the IBPA was it was negotiable. I was able to kind of talk through it with them and negotiate a few points with it, but it was all very clear, very transparent. I really didn't have issues working through that with them, which was another major green flag for me.
Tell us a little bit about Of Constellations and Clockwork. What is it about? What is the concept? We call it a blurb. Throw it out there for us.
Yes. So, well, I have it with me, so I'll hold it up.
Ooh, yay. Oh my goodness. So pretty.
Yeah, so it's set in an Italian Renaissance inspired world, so not the actual Italian Renaissance, but just a world heavily based off of it. And it follows this dispossessed noble, Clemenza, who has kind of reestablished herself as a clockmaker in the main city, Silvascura there. She is brought on a heist with a bunch of people to go steal illicit experiments, ironically for the man who actually ruined her family. And so it's all about, these people, they have to work together to steal this thing. And they kind of grapple with, we know this isn't the right thing to do, but we kind of have to do it. Is there any way to get around it? And they also all hate each other at the beginning. And so they're forced to work together and also overcome these internal issues they have. And yeah, it's kind of a fun heist, but it also deals with some like deep philosophical and ethical questions too, and has, enemies to lovers, found family, betrayals that happen.
That sounds so exciting, which then brings me to the point to, you are busy writing a sequel, right?
Yes, I'm writing the sequel at the moment.
Okay, so when you went to the hybrid publishing company, were you like, this is my novel, will you please take it? And they were like, okay, yep, you do, let's do this. Or were they like, okay, is this part of a series? Do you want to have 15 books? Do you want to have 20 books? Because I know for traditional publishing, when you approach an agent and you're like, can you please represent me? They want you to have other novels, because if they're going to take you on, they want to know that you want to make a career out of it so that they can sell it, because agents make commissions. With hybrid publishing, like, did they have those expectations, or what was that all about?
So yeah, so I had, sold the novel in my query letter to them initially as a standalone with series potential, which is a phrase I had kind of been taught to use. Even though you have to be kind of vague in that initial, query letter as a new writer, know for sure for yourself if you want it to be a standalone or part of a series. And ideally, I would recommend even writing the full series before you even query the first novel, just again, from my experience and having talked to others, because with this book, more so than other things I'd written, I was very ambivalent on if I would have it standalone or be part of a series, because I thought it actually could work fairly well as a standalone. But at the same time, once you reach the end of it, you could definitely see how it can continue on into at least a sequel. And so this was something my publisher talked to me about during our initial calls, even before any decisions had been made. They were curious to know, do you really want it to be a standalone? Could you write a sequel? They seemed very interested in having a sequel to it and kind of thought it would work best that way. And I agreed to the more I thought about it. I am happily writing a sequel for it, which I do think works, but I wish I had thought about it more and thought it through more before I actually published the first one.
We hear from a lot of agents that say, don't write the sequel, only have it mapped out, have like the bare bones zero draft of your sequels, because if the first book doesn't sell well, then you've wasted all your time writing sequels that are never going to hit the shelf. So go to your next idea and start those ones, which I find very interesting that you're like, but with the hybrid publishing, I wish I had done more of the sequel. Do you feel like that's just because you feel like with your time and your energy, you could have written more of the sequel beforehand? Or is it more that the hybrid publisher feels more like they don't care how much the first one sells if you're willing to do more?
So that's interesting. So I'll first say that I actually agree most with what you'd heard from agents too. Maybe that is better than to have just at least a bare bones, like zero draft of the sequels, which again was not something I had. So I would say it's a little bit both for me. I definitely would have had more time earlier to write the sequel. I started writing the sequel while I was pregnant with my second child, and now I have my second child and we've moved houses and everything, so we're in utter chaos right now. So personally, it would have been easier to have had the sequel better thought out earlier. But as far as the publisher, I'm not sure what kind of expectations they had. Again, they kind of seemed to me like they were very interested in having a sequel that they thought that worked best for the story. So I kind of hesitate to say if that's hybrid publishing in general, it works best this way. I would just definitely say think through that all better than I did.
It very well could be that they were just thinking forward of whether it really was a standalone or a series book. That's a phrase that we use in querying as well, a standalone with series potential, or a standalone with duology potential, or whatever your vision for it is. But we've had people say, if it isn't a standalone, if it needs that second book, if it needs the rest, don't tell us it could be a standalone. Tell us it is a part of a series. Don't give us that expectation. So I almost wonder if they were feeling it out so that they knew what they were signing on for, maybe.
Yeah, I was told that if it was really going to be a standalone, things would need to be tied up a lot better at the end. My initial thought was, I could see it being a standalone, but I kind of liked having a few unanswered questions because I thought it fit with the themes of the stories. But they were like, no, if it is going to be a standalone, we really want, XYZ tied up a lot better. So I think that's kind of where they were coming from as well with it.
Okay, that makes sense. I like that.
I like that answer. Good answer, Alexandra. Good answer.
So if you want to dig really deep into traditional publishing and self-publishing, back in season 1, episodes 5 and 6, we talked very in depth with that. I want to just kind of highlight some of the differences here between those and hybrid publishing. So let's talk on the sales side. So in traditional publishing, you pay nothing up front for a traditional publisher. That's one of the things I want people to remember. If the publisher wants you to pay anything, they're not a traditional publisher. They're going to fall in a different area. But that means the sell of the book is where they make their money, and they're going to take their cut, and your agent is going to take their cut, and all those things. So you only get a certain percent of the cut of the book. And that can change depending on if they give you an advance and all these crazy things. But typically, if it's straight royalties, I've heard anything from 5% to 9%, depending on the books and the contract, I think, of each book sale. Where self-publishing, you have to put all the money forward first. You have to pay for everything, but then you get to keep everything that you make. And I know that places like Amazon might take a little cut or something, but for the most part, you get to keep most of the royalties. So how does the royalty contract work for the hybrid publishers?
Yeah, so you do get a lot higher percent of royalties. If I remember correctly, it's generally around 60 to 70%, I want to say. So yeah, it's pretty high. And then again, with hybrid publishing, I think, some might have you pay up front. But again, I think, as I said, I'm always leery if they make you pay up front, because that's something that Vanity Presses, of course, do. Whereas mine runs a Kickstarter first. So I actually didn't even have to put any money forward. We just ran a Kickstarter for it and gathered all of the funds that way to pay for the things like the editors, the cover designers, that sort of thing. But then at the same time, unlike with traditional publishing, you don't get an advance. So you do just get royalties. Whereas I think with traditional publishing, I've heard a lot of writers starting out will kind of rely on that advance, and then they might not see, as much in royalties because it's such a lower cut.
Yeah, and sometimes people can't even make back their advance, and so you never see a royalty.
Exactly.
So quality and distribution. When your traditional publisher is putting out a book, they tend to have very high quality products, both in their hardback and their paperback. And they tend to have a lot of broad distribution. And they go to places like rights fairs and make sure that your distribution gets where you want it, make sure that things are sold to the people who are going to buy your book that they have connections with. Or self-publishing, you have to do that all yourself. So you're less likely to get into things like libraries or big bookstores, things like that. And you have to do all that legwork yourself. I did see self-publishers at the rights fair when I was there trying to get those contracts, but they had to pay to go to the fair and then hopefully get a spot in to meet with all these people to sell their books. It's a lot of work for a self-publisher. Where does the hybrid publisher fall on that for the quality of the books and the distribution?
So I'd say the quality, again, looking at the paperback now, and I do have a hardcover edition too that was a stretch goal with the Kickstarter, and the hardcover I think is absolutely beautiful. I'm very happy with the quality of it, physically. The distribution, they did give me an option with the ebook distribution to remain exclusive to Amazon, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, or to do a wider distribution. And I chose wider, which means you can get my ebook from Barnes & Noble, or I was even looking at some Italian website for ebooks, and I found my book on there. So you can kind of get my book anywhere, I think, that sells ebooks or physical copies online. I was able to request it through my library in my hometown, which was really fun and very sentimental to me, because I used to do their summer reading program when I was a kid. And actually even a bookstore in Florence, I asked them if they could stock my book, and they were able to find it through their distributor. I've been very happy with how well it's been distributed too, because I've been able to kind of find it everywhere.
That's fantastic. It feels like that's everywhere you would want to be able to be found.
Yeah.
Oh, that is so cool. And especially because when I went to Italy and you go to the bookstore, everything is in Italian. And I was just like, it's lovely, but I can't read any of this. I mean, I know in each country in Europe, there is a section that's English.
They're always very small, though.
It is very small. It is. But I also find it so interesting because depending on where you distribute your novel, the cover might differ. For example, in the UK, they have a different cover than they have in the USA, which is really annoying because I was just like, that's a bit rude, because I read a novel that had a USA cover on it and now I have to buy the UK cover in South Africa. I was like, this is unacceptable and my visual palette does not like this. So did they change the cover for your novel if it was distributed in Italy or a store in Italy as well, or did it stay the same?
No, it stayed the same. because I believe they're distributors through Ingram Spark, I think. See, I don't know a lot about these like distribution networks, so it's the same cover.
That's nice. I really like the cover. I love silhouettes. It's, does something to you. You're like,
Yeah.
mystery.
For some reason, I'd always imagine my book cover for any book involving silhouettes. I don't know why, but it was just something I had in my head. So I brought that up to the designer.
It's very fitting. Like, is it going to be a crime? Is it not? Are they going to become lovers? Are they not?
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for coming, because I feel like I understand it a lot better and I'm not so scared of hybrid publishing. But thank you so much for giving us that perspective of an author who published with a hybrid publisher and what your experience was and what you've been able to do with your work now since you joined them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was scared and leery of hybrid publishing too, until you really have to look at like them specifically and not like as a group, I would say. But yeah, it was a very, very good decision for me in the end.
Yeah, that is fantastic. And especially if you have like 2 kids that you have to take care of, and you have a job, and you have a husband, and you want to drink wine in Italy. You have to have those flexibilities and all those things to work in your favor.
Exactly.
If you were to give any advice to a new writer, what would your advice be?
To stay on theme here, not to be like how I was and have a very narrow focus on what publishing looks like and what successful publishing looks like, because again, I was very much like, I won't consider myself a serious author until I'm traditionally published and have an agent and all of that. And I just think that's not true, especially nowadays. Especially seeing, I know so many self-publishers now, and I have a lot of respect for their work, and I see how successful a lot of them have been. And so I would just say to any new writer, be open to different avenues of publishing, do your research, but also find what works for you and what works for your specific book too. And you can change paths over the course of different novels as well. It's not like you have to be stuck with one way of publishing forever.
I love that so much for so many reasons. You have to be honest with yourself and about your work.
Yeah, you really do.
Well, thank you so much. And if you are looking for Alexandra's books or links for this episode, they will all be down in the description of this episode. So you can find Alexandra, you can find her books, you can find the websites that we've mentioned. And we like to keep it short here on Tea and Tales. Get your fingers back on the keyboard and your pens back on paper.
And if you like what we are doing here and you love the topics that we are discussing and the guests that we have on, then go follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Threads at Tea and Tales Podcast. And on Twitter/X and TikTok at Podcast Tea Tales. And go to that purple icon on your device and go give us 5 stars and go comment and tell us how much you love hybrid publishing or traditional publishing or self-publishing or no publishing. And then help us to go up, 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 up to the top.
Happy writing.
Bye.